Hey everyone, it's been a while. um, Last couple of times I made a couple of videos on action games and difficulties and stuff like that. Uncharted. And today I thought it would be cool to talk about a genre that is also near and dear to my heart and one that I don't often talk about on Stinger Magazine. Not that I do anything on Stinger Magazine lately. I am so sorry. It's JRPGs, especially turn-based ones. It's no secret if you follow me on Twitter that I really like turn-based RPGs, and this mostly has to do with my past. When I grew up, one of the first games that I really got into was Pokemon. I played it a lot on the Game Boy. I think everybody of my generation grew up playing that game. And obviously, as a kid, you don't understand it. Like, I didn't even speak the language. I just walked everywhere until I sort of managed to get past. It's still a mystery to me how I ever found out that you had to buy the soda can to get through the gate. I think it just happened by accident. And all the combat was just press the move that does the most damage. You know, my Venusaur would just do Solar Beam because it deals the most damage, right? I was still proud that I sort of figured out that sleep powder is good. Like, put him to sleep and then nuke him. That was about the extent of it, but stuff like, especially in the second entries, I think it was Sword Dance, Sand Attack, like that's useless. Don't use that. Just spam the strongest stuff. And then when I got older, I would play games like Tales of Symphonia, Baten Kaitos, and I would still get that itch of like, oh, that's really cool. I like the stories as well. Growing up, they really inspired me. I actually wrote a fantasy novel, if you can believe it, when I was like a teenager, inspired by Golden Sun. Hey, one of my favorite games. Everybody knows that I'm a big fan of Golden Sun. I grew up with it. But lately, I've been on a sort of a JRPG binge again. And that happened because of this game. I should have just put this table over here. Way handier. Which is this game, Lost Odyssey. Now, this is not the main game I'm going to be talking about in this video. That one will come in a bit. But what I really like about JRPGs, and it's sort of similar to action games, is it's a game that you can solve, but you can always grow in. And what I mean by that is, for example, if we grab, for example, Ninja Gaiden 2, which is a very easy example. If you watch my channel, you know Ninja Gaiden, because I like those games a lot. In Ninja Gaiden, you can solve the combat. It's very easy. Especially when, for example, Ninja Gaiden 2, you have the Tonfa sticks, you do on-landing UTs, you do the Flying Swallow cancelled into the dash. You can win basically every fight. Against the bosses, there's a specific combo you can use, or you can just use the most optimal tactics that you can find online. Like against Sidonius, you can use the Scythe. Stuff like that. Then you've solved it. All right? It's boring now. Then you can go further. Then you can go like, okay, but I know the broken stuff now, but I want to play it more. Like, I want to have fun. I want to get better. I want to understand the situations better. So you start toying with weapons. You start toying with different setups and everything. And it stays fun. Like, it's a game that can constantly give you new inputs and stuff to experiment with. Now, what happens with JRPGs is people will play them. They will find the solution. For example, if we grab, for example, Golden Sun. Hey, here it is again. I just want to grab a box. It's nice to hold something in your hand while you're talking. With Golden Sun, you can sort of solve the combat by using the summon system. I'm not going to go too in-depth in how the mechanics work. I highly recommend you play the game. It's very fun, very cute art style, good sprite work, great music. But basically, if you spam summons, you can basically win every fight because summons deal percentage-based damage, plus some extra. So what that means is if you fight against a boss, like, you'll nuke 25% of their health gone, just evaporated. Most of the techniques that players use against the harder bosses or even the secret bosses is just go in there and spam all the summons, which are like super magic attacks, until the enemy is dead, and then you move on. And you can sort of, that's like the equivalent of spamming Tonfa UTs. But for some reason with JRPGs, people will then say like, okay, it's solved, the combat's done, there's no more experimentation. And for me, it's like, okay, but why is there with this type of game then sort of like we're not going to go further. Like, there's no need. I've solved the puzzle. Because in a sense, JRPGs are puzzle games. They give you a lot of randomized encounters and some not randomized, like bosses. And there's a lot of pieces in play, like how much health do you have? How much mana do you have? Do you have all the hidden collectibles that make you stronger? Yes or no? That make every fight try to feel a bit unique, even though eventually you'll just get it down to a certain programming. Like this fight will be like, okay, I use this. I know that enemy is weak to fire, so I'm just going to spam fire and just move on. So you can solve it. But you can also make it more fun for yourself. For example, in Golden Sun, I did a challenge run where I didn't use the summon system. I just used the Jin. And I didn't equip any armor. Suddenly, very challenging game. I didn't use items either. I did another run where I didn't use magic, but I did use items. Also very challenging and fun, because suddenly you don't have healing spells and everything. There's a lot of classes that you can use in this game by equipping specific Jin. And I just refused to use the classes I always used. Just try the other ones. Maybe they're shit, but it's variation. You might find some other setups, or it's just fun to play something else. And I feel a lot of people already don't do that anymore. They're just, I went to, I don't know, Game 8 or fucking GameFAQs or this YouTuber that gave me the most overpowered build and just gonna spam that. Game solved, boring ass game, bad comment, move on. And the same can happen with Lost Odyssey. Lost Odyssey is a game, unlike Golden Sun, where difficulty can be a bit high at times. Like Golden Sun's random encounters, the difficulty is so low that even on the hard mode in the sequel, bosses just have a little bit more HP and they hit a little bit harder. But if you know the weaknesses, you just mash on through. And otherwise, enemies still are not a threat. They will never outdamage your heals or whatever. In Lost Odyssey, you can die. Especially later on, there's random encounters where the game really plays with the line mechanic. So you can put party members in the front line and the back line, and the enemy can do the same. And enemies in the back line take less damage. So for example, in the back line, they'll have casters that do debuffs on you and curse you and God knows what else. While the front line tank you or steal your health to top off the ones in the back. If you're not strategizing and doing smart play, you won't win. You will die. But again, once you've solved like that fight, like you've done it a couple of times, okay, I do this spell and that spell and that one's weak to that. Once you've done that, it's over. Like, they cannot beat you, especially because leveling is a thing, especially in Golden Sun. Like, Lost Odyssey has a level cap per area for you, so you can't really grind. But you can equip specific skills that eventually just solve the combat for you. How the game works is you have 4 protagonists, and all of these protagonists are immortal, so they'll also resurrect after a few turns if the rest of the party's not dead. And you haven't, they can learn skills from other characters by sort of, they're like looking at them for like a couple of fights, and they're like, oh, okay, now I get how you do that, and now I can equip that skill, which can result in the fact that they can eventually learn like every skill in the game. But some of the skills are broken. For example, there's a skill that's called Absorb Fire. So basically all the fire spells are being absorbed, they heal you. Or I think it's null, like they don't heal you, but they just don't damage you. But you can get that for every element. So I think you can already see where this is going. I remember my first time playing this game in the final boss. I reached the final boss and all his spells did 0 damage. I was like, ah, okay, this is not really challenging anymore. So I just buffed my main caster and just nuke, and he's gone. Wow, that was not challenging at all. And again, then you can sort of push it further. For example, you need to upgrade the skill slots. So right now I'm doing a challenge run in this game where I'm not upgrading the skill slots. So my immortals only have 2 skills. So every boss fight, I'm sort of like measuring, like, okay, I'm gonna give this one this skill, because skill slots, for example, being able to cast magic is also a skill. So okay, this one I really need to give the ability to cast because I need to cast those buffs. This one's gonna be immune to poison because I know this boss does poison, so at least I have one that's immune. Stuff like that, you start to strategize outside of your comfort zone. And maybe you can try low level runs and everything of that sort. Or you can just say, like, I'm not going to use the overpowered skills. Like, you can just keep playing and trying out new stuff. Which leads me, there's probably a couple of people who are like, oh, he's finally playing this game. I'm so happy. Nocturne. Shin Megami Tensei 3. This actually was pretty hard to find, a copy of this game. In Europe, it's called Lucifers Call. So I remember like a couple of years ago, I was constantly looking for Shin Megami Tensei 3. I could not find it, but I did find this one. I was like, nah, that's not the one. It's probably one of those weird spin-offs like Strange Journey or Digital Devil Saga or Survivor Devil. I don't know. There's this series. It's a fucking rabbit hole like, that you jump into. But eventually I figured out like, hey, this is actually the game everybody's telling me to play. At least the people that know I like JRPGs. And what I like about this game is that from the outset, it already has a hard difficulty. So you're sort of forced to learn the mechanics instead of like, for example, Golden Sun, where you can just mash one button and get to the end. But what I also like about this game is that not only does it reward knowledge, for example, the way the game works, I'm just going to do a very short explanation. You've got one turn per character. Every character that you have in the battlefield gives you a turn icon. If you hit an enemy with a weakness, so for example, an enemy is weak to lightning, and you cast Zeo, which is a lightning spell, electric spell. Not only do you do bonus damage, but you get your turn starts blinking instead of being spent. And now a turn can only blink once. So if you, for example, do a weakness again, it will be spent. You can already see, like, for example, if you have 4 casters, they all know electric spells, and the boss is weak to electric, you've got 8 turns instead of 4, which is good. Critical hits also do this. And the critical, you can force them with specific skills, or you can increase the chances with specific stats or other abilities. But crits are a bit more random, so you can't really rely on them. But if they happen, it's like, okay, how can I use this extra turn that's been given to me? The flip side is it can also be done to you. So, for example, yesterday, I'm right now playing it on hard mode, which everybody says, oh, it's so unbalanced, blah, blah, blah. Okay, the tutorial is unbalanced. Afterwards, I feel it's pretty doable so far. What's interesting is, like, I'm in an area where there's a lot of casters that do force magic, which is like the wind element of the game. It seems like a mistranslation because all the spells are wind, but it's called force. And the force spells, what they do, damage. But I had a character with me who was weak to force, and I knew this, yet I brought him with me because he was a good caster. So what happens is, the fight starts, I get ambushed, the AI is like, hey, there's a guy that's weak to force. They nuke the fuck out of him for extra turns, and then they nuke my protagonist, I'm dead, game over, time to replay half an hour. Which sucks, like it made me pissed off, but later on I felt like, that was my bad, I made a mistake. And what the game does in a really fun way for me is that it has that intrinsic randomness to it, which action games also have. Like, even if you solve the puzzle in, for example, Ninja Gaiden, there's always one thing, there's just a little thing that can go different. Like if an enemy just goes out of your line of sight or goes up a cliff, or instead of yellow orb, they drop a red orb, and you're like, oh, but I actually need the Nimpo, my Nimpo stock is low. I want to absorb that, so you don't do a UT. Instead of, if it was a yellow orb, you would absorb it. Suddenly there's very minor changes. And in this game, I have the same thing. For example, you can recruit demons, kind of like Pokemon, or actually Pokemon's kind of like this. And those demons can eventually say like, hey, I want to learn a new skill. I want to change an existing skill to a new one. Instead of telling you what the new one's going to be, it just says, I want to change a skill. And you're like, what? And I think this is where a lot of people will go for the safe route and say like, nah, yeah, don't change the skill. Like, I'm happy with the skills that I chose. But I feel like if you do say yes to that, you might screw yourself over, but you're playing more with like that space of adapting. Like, okay, for example, I had a character, she was my healer, and she had the skill Void Fire, so she was immune to fire. And suddenly she changes that to like an electric spell. I'm like, okay, that sucks. But then you're like, okay, well, how can I use this differently? Like, sort of like a battle strategy. And the combat in that sense is, it's like chess, just a lot slower than Ninja Gaiden chess. But you can really think your turns through and go like, okay, well, what characters are best to bring? Like, it already begins before the fight, obviously. But because Demon Fusion is such a complex and badly explained, might I add, mechanic, because you can fuse demons together to make a new one, and the inherent skills from the previous one, and you can fuse two fused ones together, and the possibilities are endless. Now, there's two things you can do in this situation. You can go online and look up like the most broken build, where I think it's Daijo. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. To make the most broken ass healer character, or you can just experiment by yourself and make something wacky. When I finished the game, I was 20 levels below the recommended one because I was like, I just want to do the bosses. Right now I'm trying to explore more. But my party, it was like fucking weird. Like I had a melee character with magic spells. I had a caster that did mostly melee buffs. Like, because I didn't really understand the fusion, and you're just figuring it out. And I think that's a really fun way to enjoy these RPGs, like sort of playing with the cards that you're dealt. It's not completely unlike a randomizer run in action games where you're given tools and you're like, okay, I normally don't use, I don't know, a bow in Dark Souls, but now I gotta because it's the only weapon I have. And in that sense, I think obviously high difficulty is a good starting motivator for you to start using mechanics because like I said in Golden Sun, you don't need to use any of the mechanics because even if you do, like the fights might take 1 minute shorter, but you're going to win anyway. In this game, you already need to use the mechanics, otherwise the first boss is just going to kill you over and over again, especially on higher difficulty. But if you try and just go with the flow, you're going to have a lot more surprises ahead of you that require you to use the knowledge of the game to enjoy it more. And I think that's a big waste that people don't do that. There's probably some players, obviously, that do. I know that with this game, there are challenge runners that, for example, do just a playthrough with just the main character, or a low-level playthrough where they're at the final boss are like level 50, making smart usage of the mechanics. Or there's people that do runs where they have to fuse, like they always have to fuse all the demons together and stuff like that. Super cool. But in general, I feel like a lot of players sort of stop once they solve the puzzle, which is understandable because part of the fun is solving the puzzle in the first place. But for me, a lot of fun is also afterwards when the puzzle is solved, that you go like, okay, it's solved, but now I get a random puzzle again. How can I solve that? Like you keep challenging yourself. I think there's a lot of merit in that. One difficult thing I always find with JRPGs is very hard to gauge which ones are the good ones. Unlike action games, like most people play action games for the combat. If someone says Ninja Gaiden 2 is cool, he doesn't say it because he liked the story. With RPGs, it's very difficult. A lot of people play them for the story, some enjoy the music, some enjoy the combat, but they just like the grinding aspect of it, or they grind a lot themselves, and they're like, the combat has cool animations, you know? So it's really hard to find out, like, okay, which ones are the ones that are nice for the combat instead of just the story, for example. I really like Nocturne in the sense that also the story was very, very minimalistic. Like the tutorial takes a bit to get going. I think it's like 1 hour on your first playthrough that you reach like the first part that you can sort of explore. Which is still not that long compared to, for example, Lost Odyssey, which takes for fucking ever to get going. It has a really quick start, but once you get through the quick start, like it drags. But this game, it mostly focuses on gameplay, and I think that's really interesting. I also like that it never turns off. Like at the beginning, like some areas are safe havens, but eventually, like everything is like combat. Like even in the cities, you will be ambushed, which I think is a cool little change on the mechanics. I think this game also doesn't really care about you as a player, which is something I've grown to love lately. The dungeons are very archaic and weirdly designed. There's a lot of dead corners, dead ends. And eventually dungeons become like these sort of hellholes where you'll just be walking and suddenly you'll fall through the ground, even though there's no warning. And you'll fall through the ground and you're in the dark cave. You're like, I can't see anything. Oh, you didn't bring an item to illuminate? Well, fuck you. Sorry. Not sorry. And I made a mistake on my first playthrough. And I'm mad enough to admit it. I think it was starting the last 3 dungeons, I just used the guide. I was like, oh, this is so annoying. Like, I just want to get to the fights and everything, and I just ran from all the encounters. And now that I'm playing on hard, I think I made a mistake there. Because one of the joys of, in this case, Nocturne, is that the dungeons and the random encounters work together in tangent. If you just do the random encounters, you can just heal afterwards and use some items. But because the items and healing are pretty rare, especially in the dungeons themselves, the fights are more built to drain your resources, so that when you reach the boss, you're basically dead. So it's sort of solving the dungeon and getting to the end is a challenge in and of itself. Navigating the maze-like structure, and sometimes you, for example, you do like 5 fights, you're draining resources, you open a door, it's a dead end. Looking back, that's pretty fucking cool that they dare to do stuff like that. I can understand for some players that's frustrating. But especially on my second playthrough, I'm really like, oh fuck, oh shit, oh man, I did all those fights for nothing. I gotta run back, but I'm low on health. Should I use my mana to heal? But then I don't have enough mana for magic spells. But what if I get ambushed? Then I'm dead anyway. Okay, let me use a medicine. I can use one medicine. You know, you're constantly making those choices directly linked to each other. Now, obviously, there is the sort of elephant in a room, pink elephant. I don't know. There's not an elephant in this room, obviously, but metaphysically speaking, is grinding. Because, for example, like this entire choice system that I just explained, like do I use casting, medicine, whatever, resources, it all goes out the window if you spend like 10 hours in one location grinding specific enemies to get 20 levels higher and infinite cash. Obviously, you lose 10 hours or like 2 hours, I don't know. There's some people that do that. And that's a choice you make. Like, I don't feel like Lost Odyssey sort of balances it out by every area has like a level cap. So, for example, enemies will give like 100 XP until you reach level 30. And because the enemy's level 30 and you're level 30, they'll only just give like 1 XP. Like, the scaling is insane. That's one way of solving a problem, but I'm more of the believing side. Like, if you want to ruin the game for yourself, that's your choice, you know? That's the same with people that go like, Devil May Cry 4 is a fucking boring game because you can just direct, what's it called again? Direct DRI. Well, I've always said DRI for like the last 10 years, so I don't know what it stands for anymore. Devil Direct? I don't know. I don't remember. But you can just DRI every enemy. Okay, but then isn't the game boring for you? Yes, then don't do it. You know, when people say like, "Oh, this game is really hard. I just need to grind." Play smarter. Like, try out other abilities. Have you thought about that? Like, don't use fire magic against an enemy that's resistant to fire. Maybe, you know, maybe an idea. People are stuck on Matador, which is one of they call like the gatekeeping bosses. Have you thought about equipping the little equipment thing, Magatama? That you can buy like 5 rooms before that makes you immune to the spells that he uses. Might be an idea. You know, you don't need to grind. You never do. And if you do it, you ruin the experience for yourself, and that's a conscious decision. And in some games, maybe you can make the argument like, okay, you're trying to catch something. For example, in Pokemon, I really wanted to have a specific Pokemon for my team. You're grinding that area until you find it, and accidentally you level up like twice. Fine, it happens. But I think consciously ruining the game for you is not something the game should protect you from. Like, in another sense, I would be like, okay, I think it's a celebration that the game is like, we trust you, you know? You want to have fun? There's plenty of good combat in here. There's plenty of strategies that you can try. But otherwise, I think that that's a decision you make. Now, there's one last element that I want to talk to you about, because this is like an ad hoc video. Like, I didn't prepare anything. I just wanted to talk about JRPGs. Is status effects. And I think status effects are one of the more interesting things in JRPGs that a lot of other genres don't use. I know that, for example, Neo and Wulong use status effects, but they're generally very limited. It's like either a damage over time buff, or it's like a small draining buff. Like, for example, their stamina drains faster, or something else changes. But you don't have stuff like Charmed, where an enemy suddenly fights for you. Or what else do you have? Like instant kill moves or other types of effects. And what a lot of these games do, also with buffs to yourself, is that they don't work. For example, Golden Sun, one of my faves. Most of the status effects don't work on bosses. They're all immune. The only one that you can sort of use against specific bosses is Delusion, which makes their melee attacks whiff more often, which is useless because most bosses just spam magic. You can debuff their spells capabilities a little bit, but sometimes that doesn't even work. They're all immune to poison. They're all immune to sleep. It's useless. It's fun that you can use it, and it can happen to you, which is something you gotta adapt to. And you also saw this in Lost Odyssey. There's some bosses that you can use them on, and in most of those cases, it feels like an intended thing. Like they're like, okay, this boss is extra difficult, but you can poison him. You also saw that in Final Fantasy X against the Seymour fight. I think it's the first Seymour fight. You can poison him, which helps a lot with dealing with him, especially in low-level runs. But in Shin Megami Tensei, enemies, even bosses, sometimes have weaknesses. They're also vulnerable to status effects and buffs. And I think the buffs are especially interesting because they can get really crazy. If you, for example, I did quite a low-level run at the end, especially with the final boss. And the final boss has a move called, I think it's Inner Light. And Inner Light is just an insta-kill move. Like, if you're low level, you're never going to survive. Unless you debuff the boss. So I did, there's a spell called War Cry, which lowers their attack by 2 pips. And you can go 4 pips down or 4 pips up, basically. So you're going to have +4 or -4. So I gave him a total of -4 strength. And I gave myself +4 defense. And suddenly a move that did 800 damage did 180, which is a giant scale. If you buff yourself with evasion 4 times, most enemies won't even be able to hit you. If you buff your attack and lower their defense, suddenly an attack that deals like 50 damage does 800. The scaling is off the charts, and it works against every boss. The downside is, for you, is a lot of bosses have spells called Dekunda or Dekaja. Dekunda removes their debuffs, Dekaja removes your buffs. And since most buff spells are pretty expensive, especially in the early game when you have like 30 mana and a buff costs 12, it basically means you can do 1 or 2 and then it's over. And it's not like your mana regenerates outside of combat, so it's really a conscious decision you have to make. But once you nail it, it can be very interesting. Once you have that perfect setup where you buff yourself enough and debuff your enemy enough that they maybe have to waste their turns removing their debuffs, it's great. When you set it all up, it feels like you have a battle plan that you executed perfectly. Now, obviously, again, this can be optimized beyond recognition by making characters that have all the debuffs and all the buffs, and or you can have equipment that makes you immune to all elements. I don't know. If you want to ruin it for yourself, be my guest. But I think that was really cool that buffs and debuffs were so implemented in the game's core design, because especially later on, there are quite a few bosses that will just not take damage. There was one boss where I really got walled, Noah. And he constantly flips his elements, so you have to hit him with a counter element. And I didn't have all types of magic because my party was like random. Like I just took what's cool and adapted to what I had, which is what I'm doing now as well on my hard mode run. It's a lot of fun. But so I was like, okay, how can I like play into this? So what I did was I just buffed my magic up so that when I could cast fire, which was the only type of magic I had, instead of doing like 120 damage, I did like 800. And my other characters were just healing or using healing items to keep my party alive and their mana recharged, even though I didn't have a lot of those items to begin with. And I think that's just really cool. That's such an integral part. Oftentimes I feel like when you do buffs, you break the game in the sense that the designers, they put it in, but they didn't really think about it. You, for example, see that with Lost Odyssey. You can use specific spells to up your strength by a set amount of pips. But the game doesn't feel designed for that because eventually you have like a caster and you can hit them with a weakness. And if you do that with like +4, it just nukes the boss in like 2 shots. And you're like, I don't think the designers intended me to use this. And then you feel like maybe you're ruining the game for yourself by playing too smart. It's hard to sometimes gauge for yourself. I think that in general is an issue with RPGs, and one that's hard to balance. I can't really find a way to balance it myself. The only one that comes close in my mind is Kingdom Hearts. It's really hard to get that perfect line of combat balance for yourself, if you know what I mean. For example, if you play Neo, the first level is great because it's perfectly balanced. Like you don't have high enough level weapons that you can sort of steamroll through. But if you're, for example, 2 hours in, or 200 hours in, and you go to a stage, only one of 2 situations is going to happen. Either you are way too strong and you reach the enemies, you just one-shot them. You reach the boss, you one-shot. There's no strategy required. Like the game is basically on autopilot. Or you're down here and the game is so hard because you do so little damage, and in some games, like the RPG elements also influence other aspects, like stagger. So you're not even staggering enemies anymore. And actually, you want to be here, in the middle. And that part is so hard to reach. I remember there were players like Kage that used what they call plastic weapons. So they had a set of gear that was sort of built in the sense that if they used that, then most of the stages on the difficulty would provide a fair challenge. Like enemies wouldn't die in 1 hit, but they wouldn't die in 200 either. Like it was a little bit in the middle. And Kingdom Hearts has that flexibility, especially on level 1 runs, that damage isn't really related to your level that much. But it's a hard thing to balance, for yourself especially. And you can sometimes feel that even in the great ones like Nocturne, that in some stages you are just too strong because maybe accidentally you made a build for yourself that perfectly counters the setup, and suddenly all the challenge is gone. And when another zone, for example, what I just had, where I'm with a party that's completely weak to wind magic, and I'm in a dungeon with wind magic, I'm gonna struggle. One thing that I always liked, and I feel like a lot of these games might benefit from, is sort of a no stat equipment. This is just something I'm making up on the fly. I thought about it in the past a little bit. Is in another RPG called World of Warcraft. Hey, haven't mentioned that in like God knows how long. You had something called, I think it was Heritage Armor or something like that. Royalty Armor. I don't know. It's been so long since I played that game. But I remember the mechanic. That's the most important part. What this armor did was it scaled with your level. So no matter what zone you were in, you never had too strong of a gear and never too weak of a gear. It just leveled with you. So I think, for example, for games like Neo, it would really benefit from, okay, you can just have a gear and a weapon, and it scales with the level you are in. Not your personal level, but the mission you selected. I think that would be really handy. Also, for example, in Nocturne, it could be like, okay, your level is equal to the zone you're in. Like every zone has a level. And it can be like a challenge run item. You can just equip that, and then you can always have the level you want. And you will always be balanced for that level. Something like that might work, but in the biggest sense of the word is, I think that's maybe the hardest part of playing JRPGs for fun, and not just for the story, but mechanically fun, is finding that balance. Like having enough fun that you're experimenting and also trying and learning out new things, and not sticking to the tried and true formula that you Googled online, because obviously Google is very easy to ruin. Like Google can easily ruin an experience for you. Like I did with my dungeon experiences in Nocturne. Just look up the guide. Okay, go left, right. Oh, that item's over there. Whoop. Oh, there's a trap there. Better walk around it. Like I never saw that trap. I don't know what it is. I missed gameplay. But if you avoid that, you play on your feet. I think there's a lot of fun to be had. And I think it's really derogative to sort of say like, oh, it's just a puzzle, and once you solve it, it's done. No, there's a lot more to do. And I never understand why people with action games are like, okay, I've solved the puzzle. It's time to like really explore. And with this game, it's like, I solved the puzzle. Throw it in the trash. I don't know why. Maybe it's because specific adrenaline feelings, like one game you really like going for it, and with these games you're just sitting, relaxing, thinking like, what am I gonna do? Maybe it's because they're a lot longer. Like Nocturne's like 40 hours, and Ninja Gaiden is like 10. You know, it's a big difference on something that you want to replay. I don't know. These are just some minor thoughts that I had for a genre that I really like. A couple of games I still want to play is Devil Survivor Saga. I don't know. It's something with Devil and Saga. It's a two-parter. I really want to play that one. Blue Dragon is one that's still on my list. Child of Light is one I still really want to play. I also really enjoyed Grandia 2. I had it on the Dreamcast. I have it on the Dreamcast. So I still want to play Grandia 1 because that one's apparently really good. What else? Breath of Fire 4. I think it's 4 on the PlayStation 1. It has beautiful sprite work. But with those kinds of games, it's really hard to gauge again for yourself. Like, is this actually good? Like, I don't know. Everybody praises it, but is it because it looks good? Is it because of the story? I don't know. Or maybe the combat's really good. I tried Breath of Fire 3, I think, or 2. Was the one on the SNES. I didn't really like it as much, especially in the beginning. Yeah, those are a couple of games on my list. Also, some of the newer Pokemon games I really want to try, because that's Pokemon, for example. Let me close with that one. When I replayed Pokemon a couple of years ago, I stuck to my familiar party. Like, I just grabbed the party that I always use. Like, oh yeah, just like old times, you know. And this time I grabbed whatever I felt like. And I grabbed a party. It wasn't really a good party. Like, not competitive at all. And some gyms really gave me a lot of trouble. But it was a refreshing experience. Like, I didn't rely on Sleep Powder. I didn't rely on Sunny Day combos. I just tried some new stuff. And it was a very refreshing experience. And I think that at the end of the day is sort of conclusion of JRPGs for me, of this video, is you get what you put in. If you want to have a good time, there's a lot of chances in these super customizable games to have a good time and try something else. If you want to play it safe and you just do the familiar stuff or the Google stuff, it's not going to be fun for you. Or it might be a bit boring. Like, yeah, what's the big deal? You know, why does this guy like it so much? I just did that thing. It's not that fun for me. Give it a shot. So I hope you guys enjoyed this 40-minute sort of brainwash video, like play JRPGs in the fun way, and looking at my beautiful face. And I think that plant is dying, actually. It looks okay. It looks okay. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for your time once again. Like I said, it was just an ad hoc video. I finished Nocturne yesterday. I wanted to talk about it. And yeah, I hope you guys are good. And I don't know when I'm going to make a video again next. Like, this is just an ad hoc thing. Like, when I make one, I make one. So, see you guys next time.